Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 137 chainsaw. Customer complaint is that it's been sitting around for a while and he can't get it started. Well, taking a look inside the fuel tank, it's pretty clear that it's been sitting around for a while. Oh, that's nasty. Yeah, that's some nasty old fuel right there. I don't know if you ever tried to start the machine or not, but it probably wouldn't to run on that. And even if the saw would have run on that fuel, it wouldn't run without the fuel filter on the end holding the line down into the fuel. So we got some problems here. Looking into the tank, I can see that their line is deteriorated. So I know it needs at least fuel lines. And when I see deteriorated fuel lines, I always go into the carburetor for a look. Before I go into the carburetor, I want to make sure that I'm not wasting my time. So I'm going to pull the spark plug out. And I'm going to take a look at the condition of the cylinder. Now, check out this spark plug he's got here. This thing's brand new. Never been run. So he did try and start this thing. I can't believe that he saw and smelled that fuel in the tank and thought he was going to start this, but whatever. Quick check for spark. We're good to go there. We'll screw the spark plug back in and move forward with our fuel system repair. There's two screws that hold this air filter in place. Bam! Well, there goes our air filter. There's two nuts that hold that air filter holder in place. Bam! There go the nuts. Our throttle linkage rod just pops out that easy. There's our broken fuel line that should be going down into the tank. Or I'm sorry, it comes from the tank to the carburetor. And then there's two studs that hold the carburetor in place. I found that if you don't want to sit there with a wrench and twist and twist and twist, a swivel socket seems to work pretty good on this style. We get those two studs loosened up, and then there's a plate in front of the carburetor that the studs pass through, and that plate is screwed down to the base underneath the carburetor. One of those screws also has a grounding wire attached to it, so be mindful of that. So out come the studs, off comes the plate. Off comes the dust boot, and there's our carburetor. We harvested one carburetor. Alright, now those studs have some Loctite on them, so I'm going to take them over to the wire wheel and just clean them up. They'll get some Loctite put back on them when we put it back together. There we go. Alright, let's look at this carburetor a little bit closer. Now, we're working on the fuel pump side of the carburetor right now. One screw holds that plate in place. And a quick look at the micro screen. And there's just the slightest amount of debris in there. That debris is some of that rotten fuel line. So the screen did its job and it kept that debris from going any farther into the carburetor. So this is our metering diaphragm side, and there's our metering diaphragm itself. It's really stiff. That's not helping the situation. So we're going to put a new kit in it. Now, I won't even remove the high and the low speed jets on this carburetor. I'm just going to put a new needle in it, and new fuel pump, and new metering diaphragm. it won't go into the ultrasonic cleaner. And, you know, some might argue that I should have done that. But, you know, if you do a bunch of these things every day, you get a pretty good feel of, I guess, the nastiness factor, how bad it might be. If I have to go through all that extra work, it might be cheaper for the customer just to replace the carburetor. You know, shop rates are pretty high. So if you add labor to this repair for going deeper into the carburetor than this couple of minutes this is going to take, then I probably would have been better off just replacing that carb. If I find that they're that nasty, it just doesn't seem like it's worth it sometimes. That's why you don't see a lot of videos with me actually putting a carburetor in the ultrasonic cleaner. So we've got our fuel pump in place. Now we're going to, what do we got going here? We're removing the old metering lever and needle. There, they're removed. Now we have our new metering lever, right? What am I looking at here? There's our spring. We'll drop that in place. And we're putting our new needle on our old metering lever. You know, most of these kits come with a new metering lever, and I rarely use them. There's not a lot that can go wrong with a metering lever except for the wear on the end of the lever where the metering diaphragm meets it. If they look good and they don't have wear there, I reuse the lever because I already know the height is probably right. So we've installed the needle and metering lever. Now we're checking that height. On this model of carburetor, it should be level with the sides of the carb. And we just tweaked it a little bit there to get it the right height. So now we're going to install our new metering diaphragm gasket and diaphragm and the cover plate. They're just little screws, so don't get carried away tightening them down. Alright, rotten fuel line. Get rid of that. There's still some parts laying in the tank. We're going to fish them out. Things kind of falling apart as we pull the pieces out. So now, the size of the hole passing through the top of the tank doesn't line up with any of the sizes of fuel line that we stock here at the shop. So I got to drill it out, which is no big deal. I can drill that hole any size I want as long as it doesn't leak fuel when I'm done. So I drilled it out to match my new fuel line. And I'm just going to cut a taper on the end of the line so I can pass it through that hole. I cut a pretty long taper on it, so there's a big enough piece sticking out the bottom to grab and pull through. And then I'll flush cut the end of it. We'll push a new fuel filter on here. Found the easiest way to get those filters on is just to stretch the end of the hose a little bit and then push the filter all the way on. You can see it's still going on tight even after I stretch the end of the hose. Now this fuel line does a big loop around the top of the carb and back down the other side. And when you're putting a carburetor on, you got to be mindful of that hose, because you could pinch it in behind the carburetor and behind the linkage. So we're doing the same thing to this end of the hose. Just stretching it out a little bit so it'll push over the end of this fitting on the carburetor. We'll kind of get things lined up here a little bit. We'll put our dust cover for the adjustment screws on the end of the carb. And you can see where that fuel hose is passing behind that dust cover. That's kind of a pinch point right there. And now we're just pulling a little bit of slack out of that fuel line. Alright, now our metal plate that supports the end of the carburetor, we'll put that in place. And we'll put a little Loctite on the studs that pass through that plate and bolt the carburetor down. And then we're going to start the two screws on the bottom of the plate. Take a look at that choke linkage right now. Notice that the orange piece right behind the choke lever isn't in place yet. It's just kind of hanging in front of the saw body, and there's notches for it where it should be. Those grooves should be in the saw body. So we snugged down our two studs. We had some Loctite on there. We're installing our throttle rod linkage. That looks good, functions the way it should. We're putting a little bit of Loctite on the end of the studs for our air filter holder. And then we're screwing two nuts on top of them studs. The Loctite's on there because, look, if that nut came loose, where's it going to go, right? We don't want it going in the engine. Here's our air filter. Two screws to hold that down. And there's our choke linkage in place now. So if this thing starts up, that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 137 chainsaw fuel system overhaul. Thanks for watching. Later.